Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traben, and in today's video, we'll be looking at a retrospective for round one of my manga tournament. Having just wrapped up round one of the manga tournament, I thought it would be a good time to talk about what I got from this experience so far. We'll talk about the manga that didn't quite make it. Which of these titles am I still interested in maybe pursuing in the future? Which ones I'm going to get rid of? And then we'll talk about the winners. What am I anticipating from round two? What am I hoping for these different titles? And so we get some sense of where I'm at before we jump into round two of the tournament. We're going to start with looking at the manga that lost their round one matches and discuss which of those I would still be interested in pursuing in the future. How did I feel about them? Separate from the conceit of this tournament. So these are the ones that didn't quite make it through round one. And again, we'll just talk for a few minutes about each. What are my feelings on them? Am I going to continue reading them? We'll start with Mob Psycho 100. This one was in a pretty tight race against that time I got reincarnated as a slime. But looking back on it, I don't think that this is my style of comic. And in particular, the art was something that I really disliked. So this is probably one that's not going to get picked up for future manga purchases. However, I've heard that the anime is animated a little bit more cleanly, and perhaps that would be a good avenue to explore this story in the future, is watching the anime at some point. Demon Slayer, the slow start, the over-reliance on internal monologues, and the just boring way that the training section of the comic was introduced, how they completely sidelined a character because they weren't useful for the plot at that particular moment. All that's really got me to where I do not want to pursue this in any form. I know it's got its fans. I'm sure it gets stronger as the writing goes on, but it's not something I want to invest in. This is one that I'll be unhauling from my collection at some point. Ghostly Things is one that I think I might pursue in the future, but it's not a high priority. There are some of these other titles that I'm definitely going to look into, definitely get some more volumes of. Ghostly Things was good, and it gave me a nostalgic feel of things that I read like when I was in high school and college. So at some point I might end up picking up more of this. I'm not going to get rid of this title. It's just not something I'm excited about pursuing at the moment. Fire Force was doing so well, and then the end with that character that got introduced with the sexual harassment thing just completely wrecked any interest I have in continuing this. I already had a talk with a friend who had either read the whole comic or had spoiled himself on the whole comic. He explained to me the ending, and it sounds really like a convoluted mess. So I have no interest in continuing Fire Force, which is a shame because the world building in here was really cool. It was one of the shonen titles that I felt like had some really strong world building aspects, and the architecture was really neat. But I just can't get past the characterization that's being depicted in here. Black Clover is one that I will likely continue to pursue at some point. I really did like this idea of following not the chosen one, and a character who in a world of magic is devoid of magic. I thought that was a unique take on the shonen genre. It does feel heavily influenced by like One Piece and Naruto and its aesthetics and its world building, and so that's a slight issue, and maybe in the future it would kind of stagnate and get stale. But the opening was intriguing enough that at some point in the future I might come back to this one. A higher priority than anything we've talked about so far. So yeah, in the future, I would definitely want to take a look at a few more volumes of this comic. Is it wrong to pick up Girls in a Dungeon? Is one that didn't work for me at all. It's not one that I'll pursue. I'm gonna unhaul this copy and not pursue it in any form. I know there are light novels. I know there are other manga series. Like, it's a wide world, and seems very popular, but it's just not for me. Nothing about this really grabbed me. Goblin Slayer, absolutely not. I talked at length in my review on this one of my philosophical, ideological issues with what's depicted in this comic. I do not want to read any more of this. I can see where fans of grimdark fantasy are loving this title, but it's, again, just not one for me. Not something I'm going to pursue in the future. Not something I have any interest in at all. Jujutsu Kaisen. I'm almost certainly going to pick up more Jujutsu Kaisen in the future. I have a good number of people in my friend group who are reading through this. Highly recommend it. I enjoyed it. It was a pretty tight race between this and Chainsaw Man, and they both ended up with solid scores. So there's a lot to like in this title, but ultimately it just didn't do quite as well as Chainsaw Man, and so it got eliminated in the first round, but rest assured that at some point I'll be picking more of this comic up. We'll take a look at each of the matches for round 2 and talk a little bit about my thoughts on what do these titles need to do in the second volume. We'll start with what's going to be match 1 of round 2 in Promised Neverland versus Blood on the Tracks. I think this is actually going to end up being one of the closer matchups because these two titles are very similar. They're both thriller, mystery type stories, but told in markedly different ways. For Blood on the Tracks, I feel like we spent this first volume really establishing character and tone. It was kind of a slow burn beginning to the story, and we only really got up to the inciting incident at the end of this volume. And so what volume 2 will need to do is hopefully give me a better sense of what is the overarching story that we're dealing with here. Where is this going in the future? So I have some sense of what the story is. If it continues to be as vague as volume 1, it risks going from being intriguing to feeling like it's doing nothing. Promised Neverland has set up pretty successfully what is going to happen and what's going on with the two sides that are now at odds with each other. This one arguably has a tighter rope to walk in continuing a cat and mouse game started off in volume 1 without becoming repetitive or feeling stale. I'm also curious how much of a bottle story we will hold this to, because toward the end of volume 1 we did get a little bit outside of the area with our protagonists, and I think that could possibly be a detriment to the overall story if we rely too much on these outside perspectives. I think it would work much stronger as kind of a locked room, single location, back and forth between these two sides. Match 2 is going to be Witch Hat Atelier versus Wotakoi. Witch Hat has established itself as the manga with the most gorgeous art in this tournament, possibly the manga with the most gorgeous art that I've ever read. Everything is so intricate and detailed. What this is going to have to do in volume 1 is give me a good sense of these other characters that we're dealing with. We got a lot about Coco in this one, her backstory, her motivations, the things that she is struggling with in adapting to this new world. And I think we've effectively set up a scenario at the end of this volume to give the spotlight to some of the other young witches that she is surrounded by and delve into a little bit more of the characterization. I appreciated the foil character in here who's like antagonistic toward Coco, but I really do feel like we need to get more of a background, more of what are these characters bringing that's unique to the story in a volume 2. As far as Wotakoi goes, I feel like this is one that is going to struggle with what I'd like out of it. A clearer overall plot. I feel like each of these stories is cute and fun and entertaining, but they're all like one and done stories. There's not a lot of carryover from story to story. They were starting to do that a little bit at the end of this volume, I want to say, with the idea of dating. Like, we've been seeing each other, but what about actually going on dates? And so I feel like it's moving in the right direction, but if it continues to just be these one-off stories, it'll be fine to read, it'll be entertaining, but I don't think it's going to match up against some of these others with really strong plots. Hell's Paradise versus Beastars is match number 3. I mentioned with Hell's Paradise that I really liked the characterization, I was liking the plot, but that the characters were falling into these really lengthy diatribes. It wasn't working for me. So some of the things that need to happen in a volume 2 is we need to get a little bit more exploration of the island, which I think they are moving toward at the end of this volume. We need to get more of the relationship between Gabimaru and Sagiri solidifying, where they're not playing this game of like, are they enemies, are they friends? And we need to cool it with these philosophical asides that we had in this first volume. I'm not saying we can't have intellectual conversations, but they shouldn't be in the middle of action scenes. It was really incongruous the way that these discussions were being depicted, and so I could see this rubbing me the wrong way if we're continuing with the trend we had toward the middle of this book. As for Beastars, I really want more of a focus on the murder investigation. I found that part of the story to be the most compelling, and it's what kicks off the story proper, so it obviously should be a focus, but I feel like there comes a point in this first volume where we kind of push that aside so that we can do character beats, we can do character introductions, but it feels like a bunch of the characters just forget that someone is murdered, one of their peers is murdered for a good bit of the book. And so I'd like this to return to more of a mystery investigation, possibly, and less of the theater club and the interpersonal drama that's going on there. It's interesting, yes, but you started off with this murder mystery. That's what hooked me into the story. We need to get back to that. Finally, we have That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime against Chainsaw Man. That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime really needs to slow down with the character introductions, slow down with like moving from beat to beat, from conflict to conflict, and get a little bit more of characterizing and going into depth with the characters we already have. I'd like to see more of Rimuru using his powers in interesting ways. So we had a bit of that in here, and that really is what is appealing to me about the lit RPG stuff that I've read recently, is this concept of these characters having useless abilities or silly abilities or focusing on something that nobody else would really think of, and then using it in a way that actually is quite helpful and is quite interesting. And so I'd like to see more of that in Volume 2. Hopefully he gets his core crew together by Volume 2, and we can move on to building the relationships up with those characters and going more into depth with their personalities and their characterization. Chainsaw Man was such a strong intro, such a strong first volume. I would like to see it quickly build on the relationships and the questions, the backstories that were established in this first volume. Because of the way that it very quickly established the main character here and moved into the plot, which is something I mentioned on the review, I am hopeful that the writer is adept enough that he can start pulling in these pairings and start seeing how the characters play off of each other, start getting a little bit more of the backstories and the interpersonal connections to build off of one another. It's another title where that seems like one of the things that we're doing with the end of this volume, moving into Denji and Power's relationship and starting to explore the conflict there. I'm hoping we do more with Makima and Aki as well, and ideally we'd have a nice balance where we are progressing all of those stories at a decent pace. We're touching base with each of those as the story goes on. So we'll see, but that would be my ideal for a volume 2 or moving forward, is to see these characters interact with one another and see all of these stories move forward in interesting ways. That's going to do it for our look back on round 1 of the manga tournament, as well as a primer looking forward to what am I hoping for in round 2. As always, I hope your reading journey is going well. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe and feed that algorithm. Until the next one, take care.